Our project title is actually there are two projects which go in parallel, and you see the title on the top, the titles on the top, and as you see from the titles, the project is about networking on SPAs, SCs, IBAs for breeding and migratory species in Poland, Iceland, and Norway. And this part of the project is financed by EEA, a financial mechanism. And the second part of the project, which also includes Belarus, granted by Nordic. So the structure is a little bit sophisticated, but still, and the project is mostly about the East Atlantic flyway, and it addresses the issues connected with the flag species of this flyway, which are depicted on the right-hand side of the screen. And you see that the majority of them, or at least half of them, are waders, and we are mostly dealing with waders within this project, but not only with them. The structure of the budget of the project are on the screen.
The slides aren't changing.
Sorry?
The slides aren't changing.
Unchanging at all?
We just see the East Atlantic flyway slide.
Let me try to change them again. Oh, yeah. This is proper now. Sorry for those multiple issues. I think it would be good now, from now. And as you see, the budget of the project is pretty modest. However, we managed to do several useful things within the project framework, and amongst them, I will just briefly list both the activities and outputs which are already done or implemented, and those which are just to be implemented in future. So as a result of implementation of the project, a functional network of the conservation experts in the 4 countries belonging to the East Atlantic flyway should be established, and management practices analysis in the key nature protected areas of international importance, such as Natura 2000 sites, or Emerald sites, or BirdLife IBA sites, should be analyzed, and this is ongoing. And as a result, the guidelines for management planning, which would be favorable for the migratory birds and their habitats at those sites, will be developed. Then the so-called low wet grassland methodology, which was developed by Natur Bureau for the UK, would be calibrated to determine the key wet grassland sites for the birds' migration, and it will also show us the gaps in this respect, which should be which areas and how big areas should be protected in addition to those protected now for time being. The recommendations will be developed and submitted to national legislation and practice and stakeholders. International field workshops have already been held in Norway and Iceland, and another one will be held in Belarus a little bit later on. And so the final conference in Poland, actually this very event we're attending now. This is called final, but it's not final indeed, because we have several months to go within this project. This is somehow connected with the complicated structure of this project. We should call it final, but it's not final indeed. And just a brief like a retrospection of our events. You see some pictures of the events which took place in Norway and Iceland during May and June of this year. You see the colleagues trying to somehow penetrate and study the habitats of the species in the focus of the project. And in terms of the management planning guidelines, which are the next big piece of work to be done, the key nature protected areas of international importance should be selected in the 4 countries. The analysis of the ongoing management planning practices regarding migratory species should be performed. And on the basis of the findings of this analysis, the guidelines migration-friendly management planning for internationally recognized nature protected areas should be developed. And in terms of the structure of the guidelines, it should include the methods section, so information on how the sites were selected and which types of documents and practices and what else was analyzed, and what types of data were analyzed and how, and we'll be talking about those issues today during our presentations and discussions for the conference. And then comes the review of the ongoing conservation measures dedicated to migratory birds, finding of the gaps and confronting the analyzed measures with the existing knowledge and species requirements and visions of the stakeholders and whatever threats and pressures. And finally, the optimal set of conservation measures for the East Atlantic flyway sites in the 4 selected countries will be proposed. A little bit about the low wet grassland methodology. We will be listening to the dedicated presentation on this topic delivered by Krzysiek Stasiak of the OTOP. And this is more or less the essence of the this task. But I hope that Krzysiek will tell us more and in more details. And I have to stop also on the parallel project because we are implementing 2 projects in parallel. One is about the migratory species of birds, mostly waders, and another one deals with the issue of rewetting of the degraded wetlands and peatlands, which are at the for the sake of biodiversity and climate, and those habitats are at the same time habitats for our key species in the second project. So the 2 projects are interconnected, and we implement them sort of in parallel. And in terms of events, it's possible to say that we implement them together. For instance, our recent visit to Iceland was combining both issues, the rewetting and the migration of waders in the first term. And possibly this is all for now, and maybe you have some questions concerning the structure and the essence of our project, because it was merely a brief overview, and I think that you will learn more and discuss it during the other presentations and other points of our discussion at our conference. Thank you for your attention. Have you got any questions?
Slava, I have one question.
Yes, please. Speak.
What are the deadlines for providing the results in terms of the guidelines and the other documents? When do we expect to get these?
Well, we were granted by the Nordic Council of Ministers because this is the institution which in fact finances this part of the project, that we should produce the final versions of the documents, including the publication, because the publication of the guidelines is also anticipated under the auspices of this project by June 2023. But this is a sort of deadline, and it doesn't mean that we should like produce the results in June 2023, close to the deadline. It should be already published there. So the first version of guidelines we're expecting in October, I think. And we'll have some time to adjust and work upon it, elaborate on it. Any more questions, please?
Thank you very much. My name is Tomasz Wilk. I work for OTOP, Polish BirdLife, and I'm also involved in the project under which umbrella we are now having this meeting. I will try to give you some general introduction about the priority species, East Atlantic flyway priority species, which have been chosen for the further work within the project, both on their situation in Poland and additionally giving some info about the red list assessment under which they were also analyzed. Okay, so regarding those 6 waders species, which are East Atlantic flyway priority species, priority wader species, we have all of them in Poland. All 6 of them are occurring in Poland, but Curlew sandpiper is really like not frequent migrant. So I have not analyzed this species in more detail. So further on, you will see the information on those 5 bolded species presented here. Yeah, so all of those 5 species, common snipe, black-tailed godwit, common redshank, dunlin, and Eurasian curlew, all of them are breeding in Poland. All of them are also migrating through the territory of Poland, but only 3 of them, snipe, godwit, and curlew, are having really important congregations. So this is based on the IBA inventory for Poland. So those 3 species, for those 3 species, some IBAs exist where the population, migratory populations of those 3 species were used as a qualifying species to choose the IBAs. Redshank and dunlin are in fact also quite common migratory species in Poland, but they are migrating more widely through the territory of Poland, so they do not really congregate in large concentrations in single spots. And what might be interesting in the context of, for example, Western Europe, we do not have any important wintering populations of those species. Some are wintering, but in low numbers. Okay, so common snipe is the most common of those 5 analyzed species. It's occurring more or less in the whole Poland, except for the southern part where we have mountains. You see that its population is quite large, still quite large, like 60 pairs. Obviously, it's not as common as we've seen in Iceland, where it was present almost on every meadow, but still in Poland, we can regard it as a quite common species. Regarding the trend, you can see that it's a bit tricky because we have quite short data from monitoring program, but the data shows some apparent increase in the first years, but for the last 10 years, we see very strong decline in the populations. And you also will see this in the red list assessment, this strong decline during the last 10 years. Black-tailed godwit, you can see that it inhabits mostly eastern and central Poland. Its breeding population is much lower than the common snipe, 1,100 breeding pairs. This map is from quite an old breeding bird atlas. We do not have really good data, atlas data, which like the up-to-date atlas data. So now the breeding range might be even smaller, or for sure is even smaller. And as you can see on the graph, we have really steep decline of the number of breeding pairs in Poland. We have lost more than half of the breeding population during just 12 years. So it's one of the most, it's one of the fastest declining bird species in Poland right now. Redshank has very similar breeding range when compared to godwit. It is linked with the similar breeding habitat. So mostly eastern and central Poland. The breeding population is also similar, around 1,000 breeding pairs. We have also declining populations quite rapidly, though not that fast as godwit population. During the last 13 years, we've lost around 35 population of breeding birds. And Eurasian curlew, you can see that the distribution range is quite different. So it is more patchy and mostly linked with the flooded areas of some large rivers in Poland, especially in the northeast, but also in the Wielkopolska region, which is here, and Silesia. As you can see, only from these maps, also breeding range is shrinking. Because on the right hand you have actual map where the green dots are showing the up-to-date breeding sites for this species, and you can see that we have less and less breeding sites for the curlew, and some of the sites, for example, in the Pomerania region, but also in Silesia, were completely lost. The population number is very small, only 175 breeding pairs. And we do not have really good monitoring data, long-term monitoring data for the species, because the curlew has its own dedicated monitoring program, but it is running only for 7 years now. So the data is quite short, but anyway, it shows again the decline of the breeding population in Poland. And the Danlin, the last species, Danlin is extinct in Poland. The subspecies Shinzi was breeding in few locations in Poland for many hundreds of years. I mean, it was well-established species in Poland with some breeding, with the most important breeding populations in Pomerania at the seacoast, but also some breeding sites were in the northeast Poland, in Biebrza, for example, where some of our participants are right now, some old sites for Dublin, but also in the Warmia region, there were also some sites. The last confirmed breeding of Dublin in Poland was in 2004. And as you can see from the monitoring of the Dublin, we had also some pairs or individuals showing up at the monitored sites till 2010, but no proved breeding record after 2004. And now after 2010, we did not have any observations indicating even possible breeding. So this species is for sure extinct in Poland. So I have shown you some results related to those 5 individual species, but those, I should say, worrying results are also supported by some other data. For example, here you can see wetland bird index in Poland for the last 12 years. And you can see that in general, wetland birds are declining very much in Poland during the last 2 decades. In fact, this is for many years the farmland birds were the most threatened bird group in Poland. And now, in the recent years, the wetland birds are on the first place, I should say. So this is obviously the most endangered bird group in Poland right now, declining very, very heavily. And here you also have aggregated bird index for 6 species of meadow waders for the last 20 years. So here you have all our EIF priority species minus Dunlin, but with lopwing and with great snipe. And again, you can see the decline, but if you look at the chart, this decline is really huge. So during the last 20 years, we've lost almost 60% of the breeding populations of those 6 meadow waders in Poland. Okay, and now I can show you some red list assessment for our priority species. We are lucky that we have just 2 years ago accomplished red list of birds in Poland. This was basically done according to the guidelines of IUCN. So this is like an official red list in Poland. And the first result I would like to share with you is, again, I should say that the waders are in special troubles, let's say. So on the graph, you can see the percent of the species in a certain taxonomic group which are listed on the red list as threatened. And you can see that the waders are on the first place. So 70% of all breeding waders in Poland are threatened with extinction. Yes, and this is red list assessment for our 5 species. So you can see Dunlin extinct, black-tailed godwit critically endangered, curlew endangered, common snipe vulnerable, and redshank is not threatened yet but it is in the category near threatened, so quite close. As you can see, all our species were qualified as threatened according to the criteria A, so population reduction. You've seen that on these graphs I have shown you. So all populations of all our species in Poland are declining very much, and also some other criteria for some selected species are responsible for the red list assessment, like, for example, small number. Okay, so that was in general the introduction to the state of our priority species in Poland. I'm not going to go into detail with the reasons for this decline, because it is, I think, a topic for a separate conference, but I will mention three, which in my opinion are especially important in the context of Poland. So first one is the wetlands degradation. And as an example, I'm showing you a map which is presenting percentage of degraded peatlands in the central and eastern Poland. And you can see that 84% of peatlands were degraded to some extent, some of them completely in Poland, and other countries are not doing much better. So that's for sure one of the key reasons we are losing wetlands. The agriculture is changing in Poland, but obviously also in other European countries. And again, many data which are confirming that agriculture is changing, and we can also see it on our own eyes in farmland areas. But here just one example showing change in the numbers of farms in certain size classes in the European level. So basically the graph is showing that we are losing small scale farms, and we have more and more these large scale, very often intensively run farms. So basically we are going from this more nature friendly agriculture to the very intensive and product oriented agriculture system. And the third cause is probably predation, not only by American mink. I'm now talking about Poland, but in our country we have also real big problem with red fox. And as an example, this very interesting study which shows on the maps, you can see that the timeline is here, and the range shift of the American mink is shown with the red line. So you can see that it was moving from north to the south, and interestingly, very similar timeline is visible in the monitoring trends for water birds. So it seems like the negative trends of the water birds are following the wave of the expansion of American mink. This is obviously not so clear picture, because many other factors may here play a role. But anyway, it's really something going on with this timeline very much linked together. Okay, so just a hint about the causes, and at the end, I would like to stress that things are even more complicated, because please remember that we have this species which are breeding in one place, migrating and staying at stopover sites at other sites and wintering in another region, sometimes very far away. So in fact, also the picture of the factors responsible for the population decline might be much more complicated than we are seeing just from one site perspective, let's say, or one country perspective. So just to summarize somehow, I mean, if I would need to draw the conclusion from this presentation, the conclusions would be quite negative. But I would like to stop with some positive side. So first of all, I would like to stress that the East Atlantic Flyway Initiative is really important because we can see that the migratory birds are in real troubles, and this is a group which we should focus on in the next years, as Martin say. They are really threatened, and we should focus more work on them. Obviously, our project priority species are also very important because, as you've seen, at least in Poland, their situation is quite disastrous, I should say. So the final conclusion is that our project is really important, and we should have it under our heads that we are doing something really important here. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, please.
Well, thank you, Tomek. And after this presentation, we are moving from Poland to Norway because the next in our agenda is presentation by Morten about the site selection they performed in Norway. And Morten, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I thought I was half an hour before, but no worries, I'm ready. And let's hope I manage to share screen. So my presentation is about site selection, and I also want to tell you a little about the localities in Norway. So pre-selection of protected sites essential for the protection of the EAFK migratory species in Norway. And generally in Norway, I used to say to people that I don't think we are very good to take care of our protected areas in Norway. It's rather quite a misery from what it could be. But the main big problems for the state governors and the management in Norway is that we don't buy out the private landowners when we protect an area. So when you want to enforce or develop a management plan, you have to discuss with the landowner what that can be done, and often they are very skeptical to anything you come with. So it's often the management plans is not very well suited to preserve wildlife and more suited to farming and other activities. So it's quite pity actually. But we have actually quite a lot of protected areas, and but many of them actually don't have management plan. I had problems with finding good management plans for this project, so it was interesting. But I think things will improve, but there are no official plan to buy out landowners in protected areas in Norway, so quite a pity. 3 levels of protection: national park, landscape protection areas, that is type of botanic values and can be bird areas also, and nature reserves is the most strict protection area. So I will tell you about 10 possible EAF areas, and I start in southern Norway, and actually this 3 is the most relevant in southern Norway that have management plans. So it's not very much, and we start in the east with Nordre Øyer Nature Reserve, which is quite a spectacular area, very big inland delta, one of Europe's largest inland deltas, but it is regulated. So there is a huge hydropower dam in the end of this Lake Øyeren, which means that large part of this inland delta is not suited for breeding. It varies a lot, this water level. Now we have quite low water level in this dam in Norway. So it's a very important and very good area for migration and stopover, and not important at all for breeding area. So we have all the species in that are relevant, the waders species in this area, and it's also a Ramsar area from 1995. The most interesting maybe with this Nordre Øyeren is that there is very good monitoring data for bird population, bird numbers. In general, in Norway, we have quite good control over general bird observations. This idealistic bird watchers, they put in their observations every day in artsobservasjoner, and they can be easily searched out and can make figures or whatever, and they are of course observer dependent, so we like much better when we want to talk about differences in population to have something that are more structured and monitored, set up data, and those also are often in this artsobservasjoner. So good counting numbers since 1983, and this is not common in Norway that we have this good time series. And so this was just a figure from 2016, number of individuals of all wader species. And as you can see, the water level in this autumn is varying between 4.75 and 5.15. That was not very much actually. This is quite stable period in this area, but makes a very big beach and accessible food area for waders. Next area is Lindestranda. It is a marine tidal area, quite small, 593 acres. And in migration, we find also this quite a normal set of species. The black-tailed godwit is quite rare in autumn migration in Norway, and as we will see later, very rare as breeding species in Norway. But so this area is most important for migration and stopover site. Øksnevadtjern, small area in Rogaland, in Jæren, and Jæren have an amazing set of wetlands without management plans, lot of local conflicts with landowners, very important bird areas, very huge density, high density of poultry farms and egg producers, and a lot of interesting things that come up when you put these type of facilities in an area with high density of wetland birds in, for example, with this avian flu period we have now. There is a lot of news from Rogaland. Øksnevatjern, protected in 1996, very small area, 119 dekar. It is actually the only with a quite okay management plan that I found for this project. So if management plan is something we have to have, this is the locality. Breeding redshank and occasionally curlew, and the other species we will find here on migration. And then we will step northwards in Norway. We have a lot of areas in between, but had struggled with finding management plans. So ended up with 7 localities in northern Norway. And on the bottom left corner, we have this Røst on the tip of Lofoten. And then we have 3 places in Vesterålen that I actually will visit next week for wetland monitoring. And wetland monitoring is actually in relation to revetting and the management plan that implies that we have to follow up revetting and restoration efforts. So that is very nice. The 3 other ones is the most important, I would say, for wetland birds in northern Norway. This area close to Tromsø and 2 places in Finnmark. So we take them from an end. Røstlandet on the tip of Lofoten. So the big square you see here is Røstøyan landskapsvernområde, which is very famous, at least in Norway, for seabirds, 500,000 pair of puffins, and declining, if anybody wondered. And Røstlandet Naturreservat is quite good breeding area for waders. Dunlin in northern Norway are all of the Alpina subspecies, but I have mentioned them when they are there. Actually breeding Dunlin in Røstland also. I just forgot to put it on the slide. But the other species is breeding here, and quite good migration area also. Then we go to Vesterålen, and we start with Grunnfjorden, which I visited in late May this year, and we will do it again in July. Beautiful area. Nature reserve in 2000. And actually have rolling management plans. Fantastic for us in Norway that we make new management plans every 10 years. Should be normal practice, but we are not very good at these things. And the area is quite big, 15 square meters. Half of it are land, and not very much agriculture area in the nature reserve. So we have wide variety of breeding birds, from willow grouse to, we actually saw puffins inside the nature reserve when we was here in late May, but they are not breeding here. On migration, we have all 6 species here. And curlew sandpiper is of course not breeding in Norway, so that is only on migration. But other species are breeding here in variable numbers. This is a very, very good wetland area. Then we go to Andøya, that have several nature reserves, very special geologic area. And we start with Risøysundet, that was established in 2000, got management very late, and actually is a nature reserve primarily for geese migration and roosting. So that is something you put up to decrease the conflict on the the agricultural land when 30,000 of barnacles and even more of pink-footed geese come in and stay here for 3 weeks. So they change the landscape quite a lot. On migration, in small numbers, on wider species, not very important for breeding area. I actually did not find any observations of black-tailed godwit here, but they should be here now. Skogvoll, very variable area, very big variation in habitats and ecosystems, local ecosystems. Very rich area, breeding snipe, redshanks, dunlins, lots of red-throated divers and Arctic skuas, very high density of birds. And also rich mudflat area there in the west. That is quite good for in migration period. So, and this Andøya municipality, they are very focused on everything you can manage to develop and not so focused on what you can preserve of nature value. So when I saw it also from land, but actually this picture taking from the plane is an enormous area that they have taken out for peat extraction and drainage in there. So I thought a little about what you told us in Iceland about CO2 emissions and these type of areas. They have a very, very big operation there in Andøya with lots of working places, but of course a lot of changes for landscape and this area was not as high density of birds as the nature reserve. You see the Skogvoll Nature Reserve behind that peat extraction area, but it is several square kilometers. Then we go to Tromsø, where I used to study in 7.5 years. And Grynnøysundet Nature Reserve, this is the place we used to go to watch birds. Tysnes, it is a big common gull colony, quite big rough lake, and always a safe place to find black-tailed godwit on migration and lots of waders. Very good area, and the whole Grynnøysundet Nature Reserve is very good for birds. Then we go to Finnmark, and we start with Slettnes. It is rather big, 12 square kilometers, primarily Arctic tundra, and one of Europe's highest density of Arctic skuas, and very high density of breeding waders. We have many hundred pairs of breeding dunlins here. I don't think they are breeding Eurasian curlew. It is Wimbrels that are here, most of them, and generally very good density of birds breeding waders. The last one is Tanamøningen Nature Reserve, which is very big distance to roosting wader flocks and very high numbers of gooseanders and these type of birds, but I did not find any observations of black-tailed godwit, and I think maybe this is very big and suitable for migration, but maybe not so important for this project. Then the bonus material, I thought you maybe wanted a little about the status of the EAF species in Norway. So for to say a little about it, I don't have fancy monitoring data as Tomek had, but I at least can tell you something. So curlew sandpiper never found breeding in Norway, and but we have them quite regularly in good numbers on all along the coast. But this is, of course, a figure that tells us a little about where we have bird watchers in Norway, if anybody wonders. So I would say that species can be found all over the Norwegian coast, July, August, September. Sorry for the background noise. And well, highest density in the most important wetland migration areas, of course. Common snipe is a species that is decreasing in Norway also. I don't have any specific numbers for you, but for example, where I am now in Mandal on the southern tip of Norway, we used to have them breeding in most of the municipalities here, and now they are not present anymore. At least in low density. So between 50,000 and 75,000 pairs, roughly the same as Poland, and decreasing, and details not very good known. And I was a little puzzled about the lack of common snipe observations from inner part of Troms and Finnmark, but I wonder if something has changed with distribution there, because it is known as breeding birds in these areas. Also, redshank was quite few breeding observations in inner part of Finnmark. But same story, decreasing population rapidly. It is bird of the year in BirdLife Norway, so we try to get a more precise Norwegian estimate, but we don't have. We have a bird monitoring project going, but it's quite low meshed, not so intense for the waders species, so I'm afraid we don't have very good population development data. They breed around Oslofjord, very rare, and then we have quite an area without redshanks that they used to be for 20-30 years on the southern tip of Norway. And then we have them more or less regularly along the coast, and the highest density now we find actually in the Vesterålen, Troms, Lofoten area. In Norway, the Norwegian Red List Committee, they don't want to work with subspecies, so we don't have official status for many subspecies of birds, and it's quite annoying because 10 years ago we got a new nature protection laws that tells that genetic variation, for example, have as big as important as species variation. So it is a little annoying that we don't study and make status for subspecies of birds, and it make it a little more tricky to study the population development over time, maybe. But in BirdLife, we try as good as we can to monitor them, and actually black-tailed godwit have its own conservation plan in Norway, so it's a little easier to get funding for monitoring and following them. So we have the continental subspecies breeding in Rogaland in southern Norway. Very small population, 13 to 30 pairs. And Icelandica in Nordland and Troms, and also very small population. And many of them is breeding very late. So we have discussed a little actually if it could be failed breeders from Iceland that actually come to northern Norway and do a second breeding attempt, or they can have failed locally also, of course. But last year, for example, there was 2-3 observations of black-tailed godwit with chicks in early August, so very late. And also we try to coloring them. We got a very nice sighting worth mention from a bird breeding in Troms last year, a ringed chick in Troms last year, sighted in Czech Republic. So that was outside normal migration route for, as we thought, at least. We thought them went western to the Netherlands and the Iberian Peninsula, but seen in the Czech Republic. Skinsey is also a subspecies that we don't know very much of. There is actually I guess if it should have a subspecies red list status in Norway, it would be extinct, because I can only find one breeding possible breeding the last 10-15 years, and that was in Rogaland. So there are some observations. Most of them are birds with rings from the Finnish breeding population. And then there are some observations that we are not sure if actually can be alpina, actually are chintzy. Curlew was a bird of the year 4 years ago. So we made a new population estimate, but ended up with more or less the same as we had, between 2,000 and 3,000 pair. That species is also decreasing a lot. Very big problems with fox predation and general how we run the agriculture in Norway. The lapwing is even worse. That is critically endangered now. And curlew population has highest density now in Nordland and Troms and Finnmark County, but quite good breeding populations around Trondheim also. And that was what I have prepared for you. A lovely picture of Icelandic eiders in the end. I still wonder what the heck they are eating when they are sitting in the rivers in the middle of Iceland. I thought it was marine ducks, but that was not EAF topic. So I say thank you for the talk, and I'm happy to take questions or comments or whatever you want. Yes, Tomek.
Hello, Morten. Is there any specific reason why you don't have management plans for so many sites?
There is a general trend, and then there is I think those people at the state governor have struggles with this never-ending discussion with private landowners. So it would be much easier if we had the state owned the land. But in Norway, you say the same situation as you mentioned in Poland, that we go from small units to big industrial units. And Norway is quite, the landscape doesn't always support big units. So the small farms are abandoned. And when those small abandoned farms are in nature reserve, they manage to get something done that is good for the wetland. So that is the opening we have. People move from rural areas to the city, and we managed to do some revetting and restoration where we have positive landowners that often live in the city and say that it is good that you do something so we have more birds in the wetland. We don't have to drain that and that area. But of course there should be a big national plan, because it is not good social economics to protect the area for future generations and nature value and don't take care of it. It is throwing money and nature values out of the window. But yeah, big. I guess this is not a problem only in Norway. We have a government in Norway that know that is worst ever in nature conservation. So it is quite a pity. But it takes time to change things, both worse and good ways. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
If I may ask, does a lack of management plans apply only to like emerald sites, or also the national scale nature protected sites like national parks or reserves or whatever?
That was a good question. For example, in the case of Rogaland, they have managed to make a management plan for a quite, relatively speaking, low value area. There's a lot of conflict with landowners that want to develop areas and farm more wetlands, and often the border of the protection area is going straight on the beach, on the waterline, so it is not very easy to get higher value for the specific areas. National parks often have management plans, but that national park in Norway is very weak protection. You can more or less do anything except putting up a cabin or building a road. So it is not good system as we practice it in Norway. Sorry to not be more positive.
Well, I see. Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you, Morten.
Okay.
And now the next in turn, our colleagues from Iceland. Yeah.
Ow. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Hi guys, nice to be with you. My name is Lilja Jóhannesdóttir and I am head of the Southeast Iceland Nature Research Center. And I know you never should start a presentation by apologizing, but I'm going to break that rule because I just very recently got asked to join this project. And I really didn't have any time to prepare for this. So this talk that you're going to witness now might crash and burn, but you just have to bear with me. But I'm going to tell you a bit about the flyway key species in Iceland, the current state trends, and protection measures. So just to start you off, Iceland is very important for waders. I think we can't argue about that. Iceland is approximately 1% the size of Europe. And of that 1%, it's really only like 7% that are like most important for waders. So it's not really a big land mass that we're talking about. But nonetheless, it's been estimated that 15 to 20% of European waders are present in Iceland during the summertime, during the breeding season. So Iceland has been recognized as the second most important breeding area in Europe, following the vastly larger Russia. And we have around 4 to 5 million waders leaving Iceland in the autumn. And we have a fairly high percentage of world population for quite a lot of wader species. We have like over 30% for the golden plover, 27% for the whimbrel, and then we can kind of carry on. But if we look at the, if we start looking at the European population, the numbers are obviously going up. And for example, for the Dunlin, we have around 60% of the European population. Here's a table that I so the top 4 species are the ones that we are focusing on in this project. But I realized I forgot to put in the curlew because we do have like a pair breeding or something, so we should note that. But yeah, so firstly, all wader species and their eggs are protected by law in Iceland and have been for like over a century for most of them. Only the whimbrel that only got protected like 1954. And like Poland mentioned earlier, we do have bigger numbers than most countries. So for the black-tailed godwit, we have 25,000 pairs, 180,000 pairs of snipe, 140,000 of redshank, and 270,000 pairs of dunlin. These numbers aren't really up to date. Some of them are getting quite dated, but they should at least give us some idea about the situation. And all of these 4 species we have these subspecies in Iceland, where we are hosting like for the black-tailed godwit and the redshank almost all of the population. Moving on to trends. So sadly, we only have small scale and short-term monitoring data available in Iceland. The oldest is from 2006 and 2007. Sadly, I didn't have any time to get that data, so I won't be showing you any trends, but I can tell you the 2011, this area here in the south, so it's been going on for 10 years. And in that area, we are seeing up to 25% decline of some species. So the situation is declining rapidly in these important areas. But at least, so as of 2022, so this summer, we have started this monitoring scheme, which is kind of across Iceland. So there are like 9 institutions working together where we are starting like to monitor. And just to give you an idea, like my institution, which covers this I hope you see the mouse, so this area here in the southeast, we had like 8 transects there. So we should be getting like fairly decent data from this new monitoring scheme, and hopefully the government will keep funding this project. It's not yet fully established, but hopefully they will continue. And then moving on to conservation measures and their effectiveness, that's really easy to answer because there are actually no conservation measures in Iceland which are aimed specifically at waders, which is really worrying. And hopefully we will start to see something change in that department soon. We did, like, I don't know, like a decade ago or something, we did apply for the EU, and then they started to do like fieldwork for the Birds and Habitats directives, which if we would have joined the EU, it possibly would have been better for the waders, but we withdraw our application like several years ago. So not much has come from that really. We do have quite a lot of protected areas in Iceland. So almost 10% of Iceland are like areas that are protected, but most of these areas are highland areas. So they're not really of much value to these species that we are focusing on. We do have quite a lot of IBAs in Iceland, around 100 areas. And these areas are in these IBAs are in areas which are important to the waders, but sadly, being an IBA doesn't really matter that much within, like in Iceland, it's not like it's providing any protection really. Like people can mostly, like landowners can mostly do whatever they want to do. So the IBAs aren't really helping a lot, I think. Here you can see a map of the protected areas. And like I mentioned, these are like mostly highland areas, and they really don't coincide with, like, here we have a map of from the crazy dogs outside. I apologize. Yeah, this is a map from the Icelandic Institute of Natural History, and it shows you areas which have been defined by them of international importance. And if we compare these areas of importance to the protected areas, it becomes really clear that like most of these areas aren't coinciding with the bird areas. Like this is like the Vatnajökull Glacier. Obviously, we are not going to see many waders in this area. So protected areas aren't really covering these species in Iceland. So a very chaotic slide, just to kind of show you. So the black-tailed godwit, like I mentioned, we have 25,000 pairs breeding in Iceland. Maybe they've gone up since this number was, well, they did increase, but then they have started to decline again. I think we are kind of seeing that from the numbers. And this map shows us like just the distribution of the territories, and we see that the southern lowlands are of like most important, and then we have like these lowland areas around the coastline that are important. And this table, which you probably can't even see, shows important migratory areas, and they also don't overlap. We have like this area, this is very important, Altafjörður here, and Borgarfjörður, and like it's just all of these places, they are just not being protected. So that's not good. And then the snipe, the common snipe, 180,000 pairs. You see that the distribution of them is quite, we have like, they go into the highlands, so maybe they are like getting something from being within protected areas. But sadly, like Martin was saying, like it's that even though an area is protected, it doesn't really mean much. People can sadly just do mostly what they want. So that also applies for Iceland. But you see, again, this is just always going to be the same for these species. It's the southern lowlands that have the highest density, and nothing is being done to try to protect them really. Redshank, 140,000 pairs, similar image, and these are the areas important for migration. And Dunlin, 270,000 pairs. We have quite a lot of Dunlin in the highlands, but it's all just the same. Like these are in areas that are, and the southern lowlands are very, it's close to the capital, and it's a good area for agriculture. So it's very popular land. So a lot of stakeholders are kind of wanting it. So that's always going to be bad for the waders. And so what are the like most likely threats that the waders are faced with? I think the biggest threat in Iceland is and has been this rapid loss of habitats. One thing that has like caused quite a lot of problems are these cottages. It's quite common for people in Iceland to have a house and a cottage, and it's been estimated that there are around 15,000 cottages in Iceland. And for a nation of, I don't know, 340,000 people, that's a lot of cottages. And you see these kind of neighborhoods pop up, and with the cottages, they plant trees and they just really alter the landscape and change the habitat for the birds. Then forestry, Icelandic government has sadly quite big forestry plans, and research has shown that that's not good for these species that we are focusing on. So that's also a threat. And then, like has been mentioned, the agriculture intensification. We are seeing these rising temperature, which mean we have more cultivation opportunities. Like crops are like kind of getting back in the business in Iceland, and agriculture intensification in Iceland just really means that we're going to use more land for agriculture. And it's not that we're going to like get more crops. We just have a really small window for the season. So if we want to increase our production, we need to use more land, which is obviously not going to be good for the waders. And then I had this in Iceland is a volcanic island, and we know that the volcanic activity has a big impact on waders actually, but it kind of varies on the time scale. So like short-term big eruptions can have bad influence on the waders. They like, if we have a lot of ash, that can badly impact their breeding. But on the long time scale, the ash is going to increase the productivity of the land and increase the pH value, which makes the land more fertile. So it's a conflicting impact that has. And yeah, just to sum that brief blah of mine. So Iceland supports very large populations of waders, and we urgently need more info on trends on demography, but hopefully that's kind of starting to being met a bit. And I should be able to get some data on that when I have time to do it. And we definitely need like stronger habitat protection in Iceland to be able to stop this decline that we're starting to see in these wader populations. I'm gonna make that all for now. Thank you guys. If you have any questions, feel free.
Well, Lilia, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. I see that Tomek has raised his hand.
Yep.
Tomek?
Hello, Lilia. So you've mentioned that you have some monitoring data. Do you know them? I mean, can you share like a general impression if the waders populations in Iceland are declining or stable, or?
From what we see in the area that has been monitored for 10 years, for some species there has been up to 25% decline. But I don't know the details of it. Like Thomas Greta Gunnarsson has been doing this, and he just briefly mentioned this to me when I was like talking about it. But I'm definitely going to look into that now, like when I finish my field season and can kind of start focusing on this project, because I'm super excited to be like working on waders again, because I haven't really been working on them in the last few years. But we are definitely seeing some declines, and like the southern lowlands are probably being hit the worst, both because like the land there is highly, there's a big demand for it, but also there is like shrub encroachment has been increasing a lot, which has been shown to like badly affect, like maybe the snipe is like fairly okay with it, but redshank is not gonna enjoy that, nor the black-tailed godwit, and not the dunlin. So we are seeing like a big changes in the habitats. So I think we're most definitely seeing decline in these populations. And also, I forgot to mention that like all in Iceland, none of these species are red listed. Well, the redshank is near threatened, but the other three are least concerned. So people aren't really picking up on the issue yet. So we kind of need to like start making the government know like there is a problem probably happening there.
Okay, thank you very much. I've seen on the maps that this triangle with the biggest populations of the waders on the south and southwest is quite close to the Reykjavik, and it's a flat area, so it might be a problematic region. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, most definitely. It is.
If I may, another question from my part this time, because when learning the similar situation with the project addressing the rewetting in Iceland, we have learned that there is no instruments or tools like something similar to agro-environmental schemes in Iceland, and therefore my question about some possible importance of the similar measures in Iceland with respect to protection of waders and other migratory species.
Yeah, it would definitely be great to have something like the agri-environmental schemes. And actually, for my PhD, one of the things I did was to question farmers. So I spoke to like almost 70 farmers like across Iceland, and was kind of asking them whether they value their waders and whether they would be willing to do stuff to protect them, and then went into detail what kind of management they would be willing to do. And like nearly all of them were ready to do something, so they were really positive towards it, and like nearly all of them like thought waders were very important just to have them on their land. So the stakeholders are definitely willing to participate, but like they're just yet isn't any money like coming from the government to do anything. And you know, and I think the big problem is that people just they just don't see it as a problem. They just like they see the birds out there and they're like, oh, there's so many this year, because they just happen to be at the right point during the breeding season when they're most visible. Like, so we really need to like step up our game in like raising awareness regarding declines, because I know the Icelandic nation really loves these birds because they're kind of like intervened in our like national soul, if I could say something like that. So there's definitely room to have these plans, and the stakeholders, the farmers, which own like 90% of the land, are willing to do it. So we just need some money. Easy breezy.
I see. So you find it like a workable and feasible instrument for management planning in the perspective?
Some of it, definitely. It's not like, because of the short like growing season in Iceland, the summer is so short, we don't have like, we couldn't ask a farmer to delay their harvest, for example, because they just need their window. But like just mowing from the inside of the field, like just a small example. So they were willing to do like different things, and just to leave strips by the the draining ditches. Yeah.
I see. And another question, because as far as I know, the network of emerald sites should be like designated throughout Iceland. What is the current status of this process?
I said no to going to an emerald meeting last weekend because I was so busy, so I don't know. But I know they're actually working on it, because we've been part of the.
Sorry, and if not, to what extent those potential emerald sites overlap with the IBA network or national importance networks?
I don't know, but it would be super interesting to know. I know that in my work area, they were only going to focus on the great skew and the barnacle geese, and they were just focusing on red listed species. So the waders are probably not going to be like highly taken into account.
Thank you. No questions from my side. Maybe someone else would like to ask another question. No, and we've got precisely 2 o'clock in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe. So we're a little bit running ahead of time, for some quarter of hour. So my suggestion is that we have a short break now, and we get back in 15 minutes. So it's 2:15 in Central Europe. Dear colleagues, we will start, since it's 2:15, and with in accordance with our schedule, we should start the second part of our conference. And now it's turn to Pavel Pinchuk to present the Belarusian experience from the very east of our range. So Pavel, the floor is yours. Let me.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pavel Pinchuk from Belarus, and for a long time I worked with waders, for more than 20 years. And I want to show like short overview about stage of population of migratory population of waders. I would like to say not many about breeding waders, and sorry. And one of the most important sites in Belarus for migrating waterbirds, not only for waders, it's Pripyat Valley, and also all Polessia lowland. And as you can see in the map of important bird areas, and also map of protected areas in Belarus, most of protected areas concentrated in this region. It's Polessia from Brest to Gomel. And one of the main features of this area, it's a very wide floodplain of Pripyat River, And during high flood, the wide of flooded area can be even 30 kilometers in some places. And some pictures, and it was from 2013, and it was one of the highest flood in our area. And you can see in some roads we can go only by boats, and like here. And but for not last 2 years, but in 2019 and 2020 we have the worst year for the 25 years, and we almost have no spring flood. And it also is worst year also for breeding and for migrating waders. And for last estimation that we do for 5 years ago, nearly 1 million of water bears used Pripyat floodplain during spring migration. And the three most numerous species. One is, it's not wader, it's not key species of project, but one of the most numerous species of ducks. And from 200 till 300,000 of pigeons stay here during spring migration. And another species, the ruff, I think probably nearly 500,000 ruff stay in some years. And the largest concentration of ruffs that we showed that we seen was 120,000 birds in one place. And the spring concentration is one of the largest in Europe. And that we know from ruffs, they're using a floodplain at night roost, and most of the birds during the day feeding the open farmland near the valley. And another species, it's a godwit, the key species of our project, and we now estimate the migrated population of godwits up to 30,000 birds. And another features of this territory is a very high breeding density of waders during high flood. In some you can see the island and the total area, so 0.06 hectares, and it's a nest of waders and also fountain. It's only waders. And in some years, the breeding density can reach 1,000 pairs per one hectare. And the short notes about our project, because the Polessia is located within borders of two global migration flyways. As you can see, it's not only East Atlantic flyway, but also Black Sea Mediterranean flyway. And I use data from our ringing station. We start to work from 1996, and till now we ring more than 50,000 water birds, mainly waders, and using the vaulting traps and mist nets. And here's a map of recoveries, and you can see that most of them belong to East Atlantic flyway from West Africa to the Western Europe. We have not any birds from Iceland, but we have some birds from Norway. But of course, we have direction to the Mediterranean Black Sea flyway, for example, Redshank. Our Redshank fly to wintering sites through the Black Sea to Eastern Mediterranean. We have recoveries mostly from Greece, Israel, Libya, Tunisia. And of course, during the breeding period, our birds using Pripyat during like stopover during spring, they are breeding from Norway to Chukotka. And some problems for waders. It's mostly for breeding waders. It's many nests died during late flood. And another problem is spring hunting. It started normally in the beginning of March and finished in 15 May. And so most of the waders included is protected, and it's not only included the red data book. For example, Redshank is not protected, but it's impossible to hunt the species. But of course, the problem is also disturbance during hunting. And another problem, the avian and ground predators, and the number of fox, number of also not only foxes, American mink and dogs. It's the main ground predators, but also avian predators, carrion crow, raven, and white stork. And it's a new problem. It's a quite new problem because we have in the years when we have not high water level in spring, we have it's a very huge area was burned. And in some places, even now we have some like construction. The people make some building construction. Some part of this areas is even meliorated, and the problem they are doing it during the breeding season. It's not dependent on time of breeding waders. And the most problem, I think one of the main problem in Belarus for breeding and also for migrating waders, it's a loss of habitat because of now we have not grazing cows and horses. For example, this area, the picture making end of 90s, it's to film, and this area for after 20 years. You can see, and the waders completely leave this territory. And now I want to show you what we do with this problem. And this is our area. It's an important bird area, also emerald site, and so like local reserve, yeah, like local reserve, and it's a quite small area. It's in total 150 hectares, and for all the time this area using people for grazing and hay moving. But when this area started to change it, we start to make some action. You can see we are removing bush, removing dry grass, and we are doing regulated grazing. And here's and side 2008 we have the first voluntary camp, and firstly we removed a huge area from bushes, and this area now is open. And in spring we remove dry grass because you can see the area on the left, it's not using for waders. And in this island we're using like make like an experiment. We don't want to do it, but we cut the part of we cut grass from the part of island, but another part was burned by local people. And you can see the interesting result. The waders avoid burned area during the first year. It was data from middle May, for example, and probably it was impossible to see in a field with the border between burned and cutted area. But we map it, and when we map all the nests, you can see the waders prefer area not burned but with cutted grass. And now about 300 cows grazed from August, normally from even from beginning of July, but it also depends on breeding of waders and terms, and to October. Yes, but what is the problem? And our area is about 200 hectares, 150 hectares, and it's only about 1% of total area of all meadows in the Pripyat River. And here is a map, it's different colors, different meadows in the whole Pripyat area. And now we want to make like a plan what we need to do in another place. And probably it's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's time for the questions.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
I have several questions actually, but they're very basic. Why are there no grazing anymore? Just changes in agriculture.
Because first of all, the local people have not enough cows and horses, because they don't need to do it. We have much low number of people living in villages,
Yeah.
and they are changing. They are using mainly for raising.
Yeah.
And another problem, we have like governmental farms,
Mhm.
and they have a livestock.
farms.
And now they changed it like rules. They keep cows in the farms, not
Keep them
moving.
inside instead of
Yeah.
them to
Okay.
graze.
And another problem, the number of horses decline because now people don't need horses for plowing or something.
Yeah. And the fires that were like starting to cause problems, are they man-made or natural fires?
Yeah.
But you said that in the first year they avoided the burnt areas. But do you know what happened in the
Next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next year I think there's no problem, but we do it, and next year we cannot see difference. Of course, here we not make like big analysis.
No.
It's a just picture.
Yeah.
And now we think it's better even because of fire. We always have fire when we have dry grass, and normally it's the end of March and mid-April. It's a very bad time for fire, and we want to make like management plan for some territories, and we want to propose like winter fire during February, during like dry weather with wind, and a very quick fire, and just destroying very short grass.
Yeah.
But of course, it's better to use this grass for moving, for grazing.
Yeah. Yes.
Because of course, the grazing also fertilizes soil.
Yeah.
It's also important for waders.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Any more questions? If I may, is my understanding correct that many of the state protected nature areas do overlap with the emerald sites?
Yeah, of course, it's many, and not all, but many. But you know, the level of protection is very low.
You mean for the emerald or for?
For both. For emerald, probably it has not official protected status in Belarus, but even in national park, in some reserves, it's protected mainly from melioration or something else, but not protected for spring hunting, for example.
And do those areas, do all of them have any management plans, or those management plans are merely like a piece of paper?
Yeah, we have a management plan probably in all the areas, but they are only in Turov-Mido, it's a very small reserve. We do this management plan. It's mainly made for waders, but for other places, probably not.
So you sort of implement this is the only really working management plan, despite or unlike the rest of them. Yeah. I see. Thank you. Any more questions?
It's another not so correct.
So can we go on? So within the framework of this project, one of the key assignments and tasks is to pick the right sites, because we cannot deal with all the sites throughout our 4 countries. We need to find the most proper ones. And this is sort of up to us, which criteria to apply and what to do and in what way. And here I get back to our experience from the EU biogeographical process, which is still on. It's not finished for the East Atlantic Flyway. We are on the stage of preparation of the third event in the row, and there were 2 more of them, and we applied a sort of methodology to select and pick the most key, the most essential sites throughout the model countries. And I would like to present this experience and maybe discuss if you find the similar approach feasible and appropriate for our project purposes. So I have to repeat the same picture which was already presented today. So this is all about the East Atlantic flyway and some of the species which are depicted here, but not only them. And actually we will see that the methodology we used is to a great extent dependent on the particular list of the species. And there is the list of our steps or retrospection of our events. So we started in November 2020 from the Baltic Sea networking event within the framework of the biogeographical process, and it's called Gdańsk event. It's merely a vague concept because it was 100% online there. It was amidst the pandemics there, so nobody traveled. And the second attempt was performed during the Dublin event, which represented the wider range of countries because it was about the Atlantic and continental realms. And it was in October 2021 in Dublin, and the event was mixed or hybrid at that time. So part of us participated in person and part joined via internet. The third one applies to our quadrilateral project, which are discussing now. The project which involves Belarus, Iceland, Norway, and Poland, and we are amidst the discussion on this topic. And the fourth one is still ahead. It lies ahead and it will happen in September, hopefully in September 2022. And this is a Mediterranean event, which will also summarize the very continuity of the events and exercises of selection and picking the right places for our activities. So what should we expect from the selection process? So first of all, this is like ceteris paribus, or for other things hold equal, we should support as many of the priority species as possible, if possible. And the cover and the continuity of populations should be presented, starting from breeding population to stopover, or to, gathering, or to wintering, molting, whatever, all the stages of the migration process. The purpose of this selection is to optimize the allocations of the scarce resources. And from the very beginning with the EU, the selection exercise, the site selection exercise, was about picking the sites to be funded in the first term. So the resources are scarce. If we invest to certain sites, we can obtain the value for money in such a case. And this is like the criterion important in the selection process. Then it should be like replicable in other places and helpful when upscaling the process, because we cannot concentrate on all the sites and all the countries. We can upscale, and the results should be like compatible with the sites, with the results in the model countries. The idea was to substantiate the flyway-wide roadmap. The roadmap is a like fashionable sort of documents now in the EU, and it looks like a table which comprises all the necessary measures. So it is somehow compatible with the management measures and management activities within the network of sites which belong to the flyway. And it should have the selection should also end up in working out the particular projects or a pipeline of projects with the use of the EU money, for instance, LIFE project or Interact or Horizon, whatever. And in our case, those two last points, which are in green, they are characteristic to our particular project, which is concentrated on management planning. So we have to take into account the actual management planning practices and to be concentrated on them. And as a preliminary finding, the methodology we used during the biogeographical events or process seems to be fit for the purpose. And so let us stop on some features of this methodology. So we always use the two-stage approach. And two-stage approach arises from the fact that there are two groups of criteria. And the first group of criteria is quantitative criteria. So we use some solid data in order to rely on during the selection process. And the second group of criteria is qualitative criteria. So we do not limit ourselves to solid data, but we also rely on some sort of expert judgment in this respect. So we used it differently in two cases, and at the first, because at the Gdańsk event, almost all the event, we spent that time in order to specify the key habitats, key species, key threats, key conservation activities, and finally some selection criteria. And then it was a sort of follow-up desk work when we worked together with other BirdLife partners in order to select the key sites in those 8 countries covered by the Gdańsk event. We tried to do a little bit different in the case of Dublin event, when we came to Dublin prepared with a prepared homework. So we had some pre-selection of the key SPAs and areas of special conservation interest in terms of emerald, and we had a sort of long list, and we had to pick the short list, to make short list out of the long list. So to narrow the focus with the help of expert judgment. So was the idea, and we also expected some post-production phase if we do not succeed at the very event in Dublin. And here you have the long list of criteria which we selected in Gdańsk. Sorry, it is a little bit, I don't know whether it's visible. You see that the part of them are qualitative and part of them are quantitative. So quantitative criteria are basically taken from SDFs and other solid data, and the rest are expert judgments, I mean the qualitative criteria. And we have chosen 5 of this list, because you see that the list is longer, and we have chosen just 5 of them, which were 2 of them were quantitative criteria and 3 other criteria were qualitative. So the first one is, as it's put here, cardinality of site-supported population, reflecting the variety of different functions for each migratory species, like permanent, reproduction, concentration, whatever. You know that in the SDF, it's typically given that this site supports, for instance, the breeding population of these sites. of this species. And the second site supports the population which is breeding and the migratory population. And the third one, in very, very theoretically, even wintering. So the more, the better. The more population supported, the more important the site is. And the second criterion is the sum of the upper bound counts of all site-supported species populations. This is not very scientific because we are like adding pairs to individuals, to breeding males, to whatever, but the principle is the same. The more the better. The more of the counting units, the better is the site, and this is divided by the site size. So this is a sort of density. Let us call it a proxy for the density in this respect. I must underline, this is not very scientific, but it's useful in terms of value for money. The site which is smaller but supports the bigger number of species, and the qualitative criteria which rely on expert judgment, there are on the table, like replicability of the actions proposed, which is explained like replicability of the action means that conservation applies to the site, which apply to the site, are well understood in terms of implementation, and they could be reproduced elsewhere. And potential for the flyway level action, which means that the potential of the site for the whole flyway level actions is like emphasized, and the conservation measures on site, they have a population level impact across the range of one of more or more of the migratory species. And third one is like that the actions, the activities are clearly defined on the site. So we know what to do at it, because I can imagine the situation when there is an extremely important site, but with some tendencies, they may be like negative tendencies, but we don't understand what to do. And in such a case, we cannot prioritize this site for action. If we don't know what to do, we like do not invest in anything. We prioritize the sites which could be like a little bit less important, but we know what to do, and this is the thing. And I don't want to scare you with those formula. However, it's pretty simple. This is the so-called multi-criterial analysis. As an economist by trade, I hate multi-criterial analysis because economists are suspicious towards this approach. They like prefer to deal with benefits and costs. For instance, here we can do with whatever, because the idea of the method is to like replicate the natural unit scale and somehow put it on the point scale, because it gives us an opportunity to estimate and assign the integral score to every site, and we can like perform a ranking exercise of those sites. So the higher is the score, the better is the site. And I don't want to go into details. And first thing we had to do, we had to specify the species list. And please compare, this is on the left-hand side, we've got the species list for the Baltic exercise, which we counted on eight species that time, and you see that it's not limited only to waders. There are also aquatic warbler. We couldn't like omit these species because it's the most globally threatened passerine, and so we had to take it into account, and some other species as well. The list on the right-hand side, it's not the resulting list. It was merely the first suggestion, and it also took into account the life priority species, because since the selection should account for possibility of life financing, we cannot also get rid or rule out such a factor. And this is in terms of the long lists obtained in the both exercises. I just repeat and remind that this is merely the long list. It is not the resulting list, but the sites which are the most important in theory, and we have to pick whatever we want out of it. So in the Baltic sites, the figures are here, and in the Atlantic and continental, they're quite similar on both sides, I would say. And these are the results we have obtained for the Baltic case. So sites classification prompts that the majority of the most important sites which were picked, they were like coastal wetlands, and in some countries like in Denmark, in Estonia, in Finland, in Sweden, and for 3/5 in Poland, they were like totally coastal sites, or at least comprising some coastal sites. And the rest was quite representative. You see that all the types of habitats were somehow accounted for. So although dominated by the coastal wetlands, the short lists were representative in terms of mosaic of ecosystems for the species of migratory birds. Here is the picture from Poland. And you see in the column called total, you can see the ranking here, and you see that the ranking is quite narrow. The margin is quite narrow here. And since we are counting on some expert judgment, it's very much depends on the selection of the expert. Should we employ another expert, the ranking could be a bit different, and other sites could be like picked. And therefore, in the Dublin exercise, we tried to somehow objectivize the qualitative part of the assessment. So do not rely on the individual experts, because on the first stage in Baltic event, we mostly worked with one expert in every partner organization, BirdLife organization, or at least one or two of them. But there we wanted to assemble more experts and give them a say, I would call it. So it was an attempt to give a say to a wider range of participating experts. And you see from the title of the slide that the exercise at least partly failed in this case, because so the idea was that the weights, because there are also the weights which they decide upon how strong the criterion is, how influensive the criterion is. So the weights should be agreed between the experts involved, and the qualitative scores should be averaged across the experts involved. So should we have 15 experts from one country, we average the scores they give. And several iterations were allowed because we were curious about the comparison of the formalized choice versus the intuitive choice and the intuitive results. And as a result, out of 8 countries involved, only in 2 countries we were successful. And in one case, this was largely before there was just one expert in Great Britain plus one moderator. So they agreed very efficiently and fastly what to do and how to pick it. There were no discussion in between them. And in Germany, indeed, it was a larger group of the experts, and they managed to end up selecting some sites and make it some ranking, even without the moderator's assistance. It was a technical issue there. They were left alone, and they did it themselves without any major participation of them or assistance from the side of moderator. And they admitted that the method retrieves quite intuitive results. And they said, oh, it's quite nice method to apply. But in the the rest of the countries, or in 6 countries, it was a disaster, and the particular disaster was in case of Iceland. Oh, sorry, Iceland. Sorry, not Iceland. Sorry, Icelanders. In case of Ireland, but there are. I didn't attend the whole process, but there are several versions about why it failed. And one of them, it was probably a mistake from the very beginning to put the experts from the 2 parts of Ireland in one group. So we like combined the experts from the Republic and from the Northern Ireland, and we just asked them to make a sort of agreement, and it appeared a little bit different, difficult for this group. I do not concentrate on the particular reasons. This is only my intuition. And we now want to. We think that Ireland case is very good because we can perform a follow-up exercise and to give a say to even a wider range of the experts, but we do not want them to influence each other. We want to access them through the mailing lists, and we want to ask them to just pick their scores, and then we can average those scores, and it would be objectivized. If we have a big enough sample or a group addressed, say about 100 of experts in different parts of Ireland, and everyone is allowed to pick and assess as many sites as he or she wants. So we have some representative view, and it's sort of objectivization of the assessment, and it could be interested. So, and several other issues I would like to stop on a little bit. I mean, in the context of our project. First of all, the list of species. I have underlined before that this is crucial for this method to agree on the list of species. And I think that we, as experts involved in into this exercise, have to find a way with specifying the list of species. Should it be country specific? Should it be generic for the East Atlantic flyway? This is up to us, and we have to discuss it, I think. The second issue, and this is a major issue, is data. Because what was good with the countries, the EU countries or former EU countries like UK, that we could rely on SDFs in their case. So all the SDFs are prepared. They are stored in the database, in Natura 2000 database, and we can easily work with it. I don't know. I doubt if this is the case for our countries involved. For Poland, we definitely have it. For Belarus and for Norway and for Iceland, I think we have to discuss it. Or if we don't have these kind of data, we have to find out some substitute for it. And the third thing, last but not least, I think we have to take into account this issue of management planning, because in case of our project, we have to pick sites where some management planning exists or existed in the past, at least. And this is the question for us: should we add it as another criterion here, or should we use it like a simple filter, ruling out those sites where there were no management planning? This is again up to us, and that's it for now. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Any questions?
All is clear.
All is clear.
Really?
No.
Specialists for what?
No, it was a lot to take in. But good to
Thank
get
you.
that overview.
Thank you, but I would prefer some questions and even maybe objections. All right, if there are no questions, let's waste no time and pass over to next presentation, which belongs to Krzysztof Stasiak, and the topic is the low wet grasslands, yes, methodology and its application in the Polish case, some possibilities for the future, including this project. So, Krzysiek, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I would like to ask you all to unshare the screen. So
Yes, please.
will
I
try
have
to
just
share
looked.
my. Yeah. And this is this one, I think. Yes, you should see my screen now. Also, you see my screen, and also I should be able to get to the next slide. So this is the presentation. The presentation is about the low wet grassland selection methodology, which was used to select some wetlands in Poland for the further protection. Also, there is a part of with initial results and prospects of upscaling in other countries, because as you see, the situation in other countries may be different. So firstly, the aim and the idea of the process, which was taken from the methodology made by Nature Bureau and Bavaria. The aim was to estimate the most important areas for habitat restoration of selected species of waders. And the idea was to do it with the most simple, in the most simple way as possible. To estimate sort areas of birds habitats that focus on the original habitats, we focused on the habitats that were used by birds recently. For example, if the lapwing in Poland tends to change the habitat from the wet meadows to arable land, we focused on the wet meadows as an original habitat of the species. And we tried to adapt the methodology to the local conditions, meaning that we use the data we have and we use the information we can gather. Also, we use tools we know and we can use for free or something close. And we used just two tools on the computer. It was MS Office 365, mostly Excel and Word. Also, QGIS, the latest version, which is here. This is a freeware program, but it's a very big, very useful GIS tool, which gives us many possibilities to prepare many things in geoinformation. We use some data sources. First, the Polish bird survey data and the two subroutines dedicated to wetland birds, which is wetland bird survey and breeding waders survey. We also use the OrnitoPL data, which is the citizen science ornithological database. Everyone can be the observer, everyone can share the data and include own observations in the database, but it's of course it is also checked by the specialists, so the data are verified. We use the GIS Mokradła, meaning in English GIS wetlands database, which includes all the data about the wetlands in Poland. Also, we used Google Maps satellite and Google Maps hybrid maps, which are free available. OpenStreetMap standard, which is useful in some presentations, and Corina land cover. This time it was 2012 because we have this version. I have this version on the computer. Also, we have 2018 available online. But in Corina, we used only the habitats of 4 and 231 for it gathers all wetlands, and 235 are meadows, pastures other than wet. Then we try to select species from the birds we would like to work on. We first took into consideration 8 species, but 3 of them were rejected because of some issues with gathering data. For oystercatcher, it was the too low population with a very specific habitat, which is mostly hard to protect using this method, and hard to estimate the areas for protection using this method, because this bird breeds mostly in large river valley beds. We rejected Dunlin as it's extinct in Poland, and we reject Ruff because I have information about 1 or 2 breeding pairs in the last 2 or 3 years, so it is not very good to estimate anything for the species, as those breeding birds are in the very highly managed or nature conservation area, and this is very specific to almost cannot be at this time cannot be widespread, this method. We choose lapwing, red shank, snipe, curlew, and black-billed godwit. We do the basic data about the current breeding population, about the last trend of the population. Also, you can see the category in the red list of birds of Poland, which Tomek mentioned before. And we try to estimate the suitable habitat of each species. I mean this original habitat, which can be included in our work. Mostly it is similar for each species, as we see it's most the floodplain meadows, wet meadows, other kinds of meadows with a lot of water, and sedges, bogs. But each species has its special needs, and thus those areas of incubation sometimes differ. On picture, you can see the screen of Corina land cover with some parts of the habitat structure. Also, the SPA Nature 2000 area, and the part of the estimation we've made. So as you can see, the Corina is quite detailed in the large scale. In the detailed scale, it's not very useful, but it is not so much, but it can be used in this work. The data of Nature 2000 appear to be not so specific and with low precision, and also there is not enough data to use. But we try to compare the Nature 2000 habitats from the Habitat Directive to the needs of bird species. We have 5 habitats. You can see. Also use other sources like Gisbert, shape layers. Could you please mute the microphone?
Ja, hele det her opplegget med barnereservat var jo
Martin, please switch off the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. try to use mostly free
Her må vi være snille med navn.
available
var hele pointen.
commercial scientific use data. Slava, could you remotely mute the microphone? Probably they don't hear us. And we also use Renal Uncover and just GIS wetland database. But we
Should I mute someone?
more than I think.
Oh,
So, sorry, mute now.
yeah.
Thanks. But using the database of GIS wetlands, GIS Mokradva, we rejected polygons which were undefined as a habitat for the wetland forest, and some parts with a high water level, like wetland or water rush. So we just focused on the parts of wetlands which are on the ground and which are available for our birds. Then current number and trend. It was quite difficult because as we have the mostly estimated current number, which is in one of the publications made by Tomek Chodkiewicz and his team, also mentioned in the red list of the Polish red list of birds, which Tomek Wilk mentioned. There is in both the number and the trend of the current number, current trend of our species, but we don't have the density. Also, we tried to estimate the current density of the birds using some data from the monitoring from the Polish bird survey. We use the squares, as you can see on the map. We use the squares of monitoring. The monitoring is held in 1 kilometer, square kilometer squares, which contain of different habitats, wetland and others, but they are selected in the most suitable areas for our birds. So from those squares, we selected the wetland parts. It's this dark green on the map. Then I took the number of birds that are to surveys each year. The data was from the 2021, and the maximum number of breeding birds in square was taken, and was compared to the wetland area, estimating the density of breeding birds square. And the density in the whole country was estimated using all the maximum number of breeding birds and the maximum area from the squares. And you can see on the table that from the first monitoring scheme, the MPM, there was one patch of data used for snipe. And for other species, the better one was this monitoring of breeding waders, MLS. Then we tried to estimate the historical number and density. It was difficult because there is a lack of data about this. The main source, and I think the most important source of this data in Poland is the publication of Jarek Korgulet, who was the editor of it. It was published in 1998, and there are a lot of data about the birds of wet meadows and marshland, but it is not the estimation for the whole country, but it's from many test areas around Poland. So we don't have the overall number estimation in recent years, like maybe in between 1990 and 2006. We also don't have only estimated densities for several test areas, but we don't have the average density for the whole country. So we tried firstly to estimate the target number of breeding birds we are trying to achieve during the project using the current number and current trend. Like the current number is that what is that part of the risk number minus those individuals that we have lost, and it can be estimated using the trend of decrease. And the historical density, which we consider as a target density, was averaged from the available data. And on the next slide, this is the way we estimated this. And this is the weighted average because all the test areas were of different size and different number of breeding birds, and we have a density in pairs per 100 hectares for each test area. But as you can see, there was a large difference between the number of breeding pairs in this area. For example, we have only 6 in this and over 100 in Dolina Narvi. So this density is not the same important as this density, and also it's similar in each test area. So every density was weighted by the number of the birds, and we have a weight of this value. Then, using the sum of the weight and the sum of the number of breeding birds, we estimated the average density in the whole country, which was for this is an example for lapwing. It was about 13.9 breeding pairs per 100 hectares. As you can see, it's in the middle, but it's upper middle of this. Then, as we have the most important bird destinations, we can gather them in one table. We have the current population, the trend, the target population estimated using the current population trend, and after that, having the density, we can estimate the target area which we are going to enhance and protect to allow those the population to increase and maybe cover the loss. Mostly in case of lapwing and snipe, the population is quite large. The numbers are quite large, and it carries the risk of problem with the availability of the such area of land we can protect and we can cover with some measures. And this should appear during the estimation and should be considered in the expert part of the whole process. Now we need the current distribution of the selected species. We used for this the database NITO, which is the which most covers the whole country, because there are no test areas. The test area is the whole country, wherever the observer is and can count birds. There is a place to be, and there is a point. So we have a lot of points for each species around the country, and there is a lot of data. We use the data for 5 years, from 2017 to 2021. And this data is very easy to use because the database gives us a CSV file with coordinates of each point. We can import this file in QGIS, and we can use this as a shape layer and estimate the local the points where the birds were surveyed or found. Some of those points, of course, are, for example, roads and places where the observer was standing, not the actual place where the bird was. But still, it is the most important and the best database for this in Poland. And if there, in any country, if there is a similar database, it would be very useful to use it to estimate the current distribution of in the whole country. So then, We tried in analytic part, tried to estimate the target areas. First, we estimated the current occupied area per pair in hectares, meaning that each pair needs some individual area, and this is connected to the density of the breeding pairs. Then we try to increase the area around each point with observed breeding bird 10 times, like the estimated area in this part should cover needs of 10 breeding pairs in place of 1. This was the round buffer around each point created using this, and overlapping buffers for near points were combined together as one poly. Then overlaying, we tried to overlay the resulting polygons with Korean land cover and these Mokradua layers using the intersection function to just include the wetland part or middle part within those buffers. So we are, from this point, we are working on the best habitat, suitable habitat for the species, not the whole area around the place the species was found. So we exclude, for example, arable land, the forests, and no urban places, etc. And the shape, after intersection function, the shape we get is a multi-polygon. So it's one record including all the areas we get, but we can divide it into single polygons, and then we can combine together polygons touching each other. And then we deleted the polygons that were less than 100 hectares because there was too much, too detailed to estimate what we need, like large areas to conserve, not the smallest parts, or for example, a small part of meadow where once the bird was checked and was observed. The estimation of current occupied area per pair, and I tried to estimate it using this simple method. I drawn the square of 100 square kilometers and let the function distribute the number of birds which should be within 100 kilometers using the density. Then I measured the square between four points. This is the part, this is the area used by one pair. Each pair needs this area for breeding. This is the breeding territory, we can say. And this was measured. This is a comparison of using the GIS Mokradua wetlands layer and marine land cover. As we can see, in some parts this is more detailed. In some parts this is more detailed. So we can, at best, we can use both and then compare the results to see what is more suitable in actual habitat. This is the same part. This is these points are the same here and here. So as you can see, these polygons around those are buffers. This is for 10 breeding territories estimated, and these are combined together as they were overlapping. Then we have it combined with a Korean or with wetlands, and this is the suitable habitat for reservation. And there's the next part. In every case, in every way we do it. There's a need to use the expert part when the expert is looking on the orthophoto map, for example, Google, and checking the estimations made by QGIS analysis with the actual habitat structure. as I can recognize using the map, I can recognize which parts are mostly wetland or wet meadows, or they are used as meadows for those species. I was able to estimate the borders. In some cases, the actual suitable habitat we are focused on in this project can be much smaller than the estimation used by wetlands green. And yeah, in other cases, there was only, for example, 1 or 2 observations of the species we need. Like here are 2, and this is 1, this is 1, and this is only part from the Corina, or from the in this case from the wetland, this wetland part layer that was covered by the buffer around those observations. But the whole part of the land, as you can see, seems to be suitable for the species. If we can consider all this part of all this large patch of the land, we can estimate the habitat for much more breeding pairs than just from this buffer. So it's very useful, and I think it's very important that an expert should see the results and compare the results of this analysis with the orthophoto map. And in Poland, the decrease of number target species was connected both with habitat loss and lower breeding density, as we saw during the analysis, because the current density is about 5 or even 10 times lower than the estimated density about 30 years ago. So we have two aims, two goals to reach. First, we need to enhance the density, and we have to protect some areas that can be occupied by birds. So in the first step, we're trying to mostly conserve, protect, and enhance the habitats we have where birds are found, to enlarge the density. And the second step will be to estimate new areas that can be conserved, that can be restored for the enhance the population. And in further development, for example, in other countries, or with if we have different data set, I think we should have time take into account the available data in every country and provide an individual approach if needed. Because even if we compare the methodology delivered in Great Britain, England, and in Poland, it differs very much, because we have quite different data sets, quite different monitoring schemes, quite different possibilities to use the data. At first, the Nature 2000 database is not very useful because the data for birds suggests a lower population, and the data is available also. It's difficult for the spatial analysis because there is mostly the center point of each Nature 2000 area, and not the points where birds were observed. And for this analysis, it is necessary to have the current, meaning maximum 3 years back, set of bird data. It is needed, and I don't have any idea how to do without this data. We need to have the estimated number and trend, and the distribution within the country. And it would be good also to have the similar data set for 1990 or 2000, but it's I think it would be quite difficult to have. So we can use mostly the current data, but we need to have. And we can, as I showed, we can do some estimations from the test areas, from parts of the country, but we have to have some basis for this. We have to estimate current density, or we can, if we have it in our data, is good, but if we don't, we have to somehow estimate. For the habitats, Nature 2000 is also not very useful because the boundaries of the 1000 area covers a lot of habitats, not only the suitable for our birds, bird species. Also, we don't have a very precise localization of the suitable habitats, so this data set is not useful. I don't know if in which countries the Korean data set is available and that would be used here. I don't know if other countries have such thing like wetland database, but I hope there are similar sets of data that can be used for this. And in Poland, there was an issue that those bird data gathered between 1970s and 2000 are dispersed in multiple publications that are periodicals. And one of the parts of the idea of this estimation was to use the sources that are the big ones, the widespread ones, the available but for the European Commission or for the scientific world. We don't use the small publications that we can find in small periodicals, like for a region or for one university, if it's a small periodical. We used one big publication of Krogulec, and it was the biggest source of historical data about waders, and we tried to estimate other things. If we don't have the recent number of breeding individuals of the species for those recent years, we can estimate it using the current number and current trend, which are needed for this, as mentioned. That target number estimated using current population and trend estimation may be oversized. I think it is in Poland, Lapwing, we oversized this 230,000 breeding pairs, but it cannot be corrected, or I don't have any other estimations. We just try to do what we can to enhance the population using the data we have. And this is a part for the expert to consider this data and to analyze the numbers reachable, or we can increase them by the expert knowledge and to use it as is possible. We also have mosaic of wetlands and other habitats which justify the designation of areas of protection and restoration only within the boundaries of relevant habitats. This is why we use only the suitable habitat for each species. Each species is analyzed separately. The final data for each species are combined together to get the set of data of the whole project, but every species is analyzed separately, and we use only the suitable habitats to avoid including, for example, forest or villages or something like this. And in our case, the most effective way was to use the wetland GIS database, the GIS Kradła. But in otherwise, if we don't have such database, if we don't have any kind of this database, we can use what we have, even if it is also only the Google map. We can try to estimate the areas using the Google map. It's more difficult because we don't have the preset of data, which gives us some focus points, but it is also possible. So we can use many methods, we can do it in many ways, and we should do it individually for each country. And then after this, the results should be made as a report and as some kind of GIS or Google layer that can be used in any system which can open it and can show the areas that should be conserved and protected. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please ask.
Thank you. I can ask a question.
Okay.
Krzysiek, what are your expectations in terms of other countries which were like selected for the similar exercise? I mean, if you remember, we started with Germany and the Netherlands, and now we have 3 more countries. I mean, Norway, Iceland, and Belarus. What are your expectations in terms of data? Knowing more or less the situation in Poland, how do you think which countries of the listed above would have some sufficient data, and in which countries we would need some substitutes of maybe worse quality?
Actually, I don't know who can have the data, because it depends on having any kind of bird monitoring on waders or overall bird monitoring, which delivers the current data. The most important is having the current data about the number of birds and breeding birds of the species in the country, their distribution, and trend. Also, it is important to have some kind of way to count the density of the breeding pairs, and having the current trend and current number, we can estimate the target number we are trying to reach by restoring the habitat. So this is the most important thing in part with birds. We have to have some current data, like the number and the distribution. Somehow we need it to start this estimation. So if there is any kind of monitoring, for example, in Iceland, if there is a 10-year monitoring, it's quite good. You can estimate some kind of trend from this data. You can estimate the distribution if you have such data, and it's a quite good start. If there is a longer monitoring, it's better. If there is a publication like in Poland from Tomek Chodkiewicz and Tomek Wilk, it's very good, because there are gathered data from many publications, many sources, and there is an estimation of the number of breeding pairs, number of and the distribution, the trend. If we have any kind of other data, it's needed, and then we do what we can. If we have some habitat data, it's very good, we can use it. If we don't, even it's possible to use just the Google map and satellite images to estimate some things. It depends on the expert, how can this person recognize the suitable habitats from birds, but it is possible. It needs much work, but it can be done.
My second question in this respect, just your judgment, your assessment. Should we use some data which is like not of the best quality and full of gaps? How misleading could be the results? How do you perceive this sort of risk in case of this exercise?
Well, I think that we can use the data we have. It is the first point. If we have the data with some gaps, basically in those parts, there will be lack of information. And for example, we lost some parts, some areas that would be important and would need restoration. But in other other way, we don't do anything. So I think it's better to do something, even on the worst data, but than do nothing, waiting for the best data we can obtain.
I see. Thank you. Any more questions, please? So Krzysiek, many thanks for a fantastic presentation.
Thanks.
And my suggestion for now is to spend, say, 5 minutes to take a deep breath, and we still have sort of a discussion of our today's presentations and results, and it would be moderated by Tomek, who kindly agreed to do so, and myself.
About breathing, that not about migrating.
Yes, this is mostly about breathing.
Mhm.
Well, everybody, we are back, even a little bit later than scheduled. So could we please go on and start the discussion of what we have heard and seen? Tomek, could you please start it? Thank you.
Again. So as a starter for the discussion, I have a short presentation. Hopefully you can see it right now. I have a short presentation regarding probably the most important activity in our East Atlantic Flyway project, preparing guidelines for the management planning for our East Atlantic Flyway priority species. So at first, I just want to remind you again that we are working within this project with a very special bird group. So as you could see in my presentation, we have good evidence at a national level that this group is really in big troubles with declining populations in most of the species analyzed here, but against those national evidence, we can also put global or continental evidence. For example, 2 of our 5 priority species are marked as near threatened at a global scale, and 3 of them are marked as threatened at the EU scale. This EU scale or European scale reflect to the fact that, as Martin Harper mentioned in his opening words, that BirdLife produced a red list for Europe some years ago. It is quite fresh, so we have also this kind of wider data. And also we have data showing that the waders are special attention group, let's say, at the scale of the flyway itself. So here you can see the trend of the specific taxonomic groups in the East Atlantic Flyway, and you can see that at the very right end of the graph that the trend for the waders is the worst one. So the waders are showing the biggest declines of all other taxonomic group in the East Atlantic Flyway. So this should give us really a hint that we have chosen our project objective correctly, and we are working again with a very important bird group here. And I would like to stress again that this group is specific in a way that we need to work at a very wide spatial scale with breeding, migration, and wintering site, very often localized in the different countries. So we know that the situation is bad, but what are the solutions? The solutions are not easy, but I can see that three main paths should be used here. So first time is that we need some general system-wide approach regarding policy. And this especially relates to the agriculture and common agriculture policy. So we need to change our agriculture in the future so that it takes into account more nature conservation and not only the food production. The second one is also like a general systemic approach, but more related to the habitat improvement and especially wetland improvement. And this might be in the near future related very much to the restoration law, which was just published some days ago on my birthday, by the way. And that would be also obviously one of the key actions to halt this weather declines. But the third path is just a local scale, so implementation, some specific actions at important sites, and this should be done mostly by implementation of management plans. So I would stress here that the management plans, which we will be work with later on, are really important part of this puzzle to how to help our EAF waders species. Basically, I can think of management plans as documents which transfer some knowledge about the birds, about the threats, about the conservation, to some theoretical conservation. In other words, some conservation measures. Yeah, so we transfer this very general knowledge into some concrete theoretical conservation measures for specific dedicated species. And the next level of our work would be to implement those conservation measures so that there is really something going on the ground at specific site. So there are those, let's say, three elements, and the tricky part is if there is if in real world there is this transfer from knowledge to the conservation planning, and in the next part, if there is a link between our planned conservation measures and those measures which are implemented at a site. And when I was thinking about our work and preparing those guidelines, I think that basically our work should focus on resolving those two issues marked with question marks. So is there really a link between knowledge and planning phase, and between planning phase and implementation phase? So our exercise would be to answer the following questions. Do we know the key problems at a site or key threats for our species at a site? Do we know what conservation measures should be planned for a given site? And are these measures really included in our management plans? And if not, why? Why not? And are these measures, these key measures implemented on the ground? And again, if not, why? What are the obstacles to implement them? So basically, our work should follow this this logical sentence, let's say. Yes, and that was also the idea of when the project was written. So now we are all here under our common project, and we want to analyze existing management plans in 4 different countries, and we want to, on that basis, we want to come up with some guidelines for the future management planning to end up with even more, not even, with more efficient protection of our priority species. So that's basically the plan, I should say. Here, this international context should be emphasized. So we are working in 4 different countries. They differ in many aspects, but most of all, they differ in protected area system. Yes, so because Poland is in the EU, we have Natura 2000 network. Other countries are not. They have some other systems. Obviously, all of us have important bird areas network, which is a common point. But we differ also in terms of population of priority species. I mean, the baseline state, let's say, because I was really positively surprised how, for example, how big are these populations of our priority species in Iceland. So our 1,000 of redshank comparing to 140,000 breeding pairs of redshank in Iceland is really a big difference. So that's another point of difference here. But also we differ in terms of level of conservation. So there are many differences, but and this might be regarded as an obstacle, and it is to some extent. But at the same time, it allows us to end up with some bigger picture. Yes, so not a very narrow picture of conservation of species in one part of Europe, but some bigger picture, which allows also for some more general conclusions and recommendations. So basically, what will be the concrete steps in terms of preparing the guidelines for the management planning? So the first step would be obviously the choosing the site. So I'm not going into detail here because Sława has already described it very accurately. The stage 2 should be to review at a country level of the key real needed conservation measures. And I think there should be 2 elements within this part. So the first one is some basic knowledge at a country level on the threats and some other problems affecting our priority species. And the second part would be to look at those problems, threats at our sites, only those sites which we have chosen in the step 1. This will be based mainly on the literature review, but also some gray literature like reviews or some reports, etc. Obviously, there will be also some bunch of papers, scientific papers, which might be used by everyone, just to give a general background of the species threats. And I might be responsible for preparing those general literature publications. So yes, so in this part we draw a general picture of what does not work well. So what is threatening our species? In the next step, we take our chosen sites and with management plans, and we review those management plans in terms of conservation measures which are needed to counteract the threats mentioned in the previous stage. So here we review only conservation measures which are planned in the management plans, yes? This and the previous step would be done separately for breeding, migrating, and wintering populations for each species. But it shouldn't be really a lot of work, because most of the countries are hosting only one or two types of populations, let's say. Okay, and this in the next step, the same we should do with implementation of the conservation measures which were planned in the management plans. Yes, so we should check what really has been happening at the site we are analyzing. This might be obviously a little bit more tricky to obtain such information, but for, let's say, for those 5 sites which we will be working with more closely in each country, it should be doable. In the stage 5, we are on those 3 pieces of cake which we will be working in the previous stages. We are doing kind of a gap analysis, so we are confronting this knowledge, what was really needed at a site, yes, so what were the threats and what were the needed conservation measures against the planned conservation measures and against the implemented conservation measures. So at this point, we will know what, if any missing puzzles were present for each of the analyzed sites. And obviously this should be summarized at a national level for each country. And in the last step, we should come up with some general conclusions collated at an international level, and I will be also responsible for that. So I will take the national conclusions for those 4 countries, and together with you guys, I mean those who will be active in implementation of this action, together we will come up with some general conclusions which could be used not only at a national level, but in a broader scale, let's say. And we want to end up with some recommendations, obviously. So we don't want to only finish our report, our guidelines with some statement that it's bad, but we want to search for some solutions how to change it. Okay, so that's it. This is basically what we have what we have planned together, and what was also included in the terms of reference when we were searching for the experts in our specific countries. But as the work hasn't really started yet, we are obviously still open for the discussion, and then maybe we have missed some important elements to our work. So we are here really ready to discuss that. Yes, what are the deadlines? As we have agreed during our workshop meetings, it would be good to have the first idea was that it would be good to have those guidelines ready for the October this year. So, as Sława mentioned, the project as a whole was prolonged to June 2023, but we want to finish with this activity this year, obviously. One important aspect in this regard is that we know that there will be this important biogeographical meeting, which will be held, I think, in September, as Sława was mentioned. Maybe Zbig will add some more words about this meeting. And on that meeting, they would be very happy to see some results of our work, to work more towards the roadmap of the conservation of East Atlantic flyway species. Yes, so we should be able to propose at least some initial preliminary results on September this year. So these are the deadlines, and some closing words from me. So for me, this is really interesting exercise, this analyzing those management plans and preparing those guidelines, because we talk a lot that the birds are threatened, and we have, in most cases, quite good monitoring data to confirm this. But it would be really, really interesting to look to see if the documents which have the biggest influence on the real implementation of conservation measures for those threatened species are prepared well, and if they are implemented somehow. So this will be really interesting and important at the same time. And what's more, I would stress that those guidelines should be regarded not only as an analysis of something, but more as a way to change something for the future. So please take this into account, and I think we should focus more on thinking how to more on this part of this document. I think we should focus the most on this part of the document, which describe the guidelines for the future. So what we should change to change the future, in fact. Another point is that maybe our guidelines will have really good timing, because as you could see, this restoration law was just launched, and there is also great potential for restoring wetlands in this restoration law. So any kind of document analysis which is stressing how important is working with wetlands will be very important here. And again, we provide big picture data from 4 very different European countries. So that would be the outcomes of our product would be relevant to many parts of the Europe. And I also hope that some findings of the guidelines will be also a starting point for some potential common project for us. Probably it will be quite difficult to again meet in four such different countries within one project, because not many funders are providing such opportunities, but maybe in some smaller subgroups, let's say. Yes, think about waders, because I was talking about quite hard work ahead of us, but think that it is all gonna end with helping of such nice birds as this dunlin. Thank you very much. Okay, so before I start the discussion, I'm asking if there are any questions to me regarding this particular presentation.
If I may.
Yes,
I've got one question at the back of my head throughout this conference and discussion, because we are entitled and we are expected to somehow develop and like present, publish some measures concerning the management planning, and we have to take into account the existed practice of management planning. But we are widely hearing that there is practically no management planning in many countries and many sites, at least, or this management planning, like in Belarus, is just a work concept that there is a document which lies on the shelf, and it is not really used for planning and implementation of the conservation measures. And in such a case, if we face the situation when there is little or no management planning, what should we do? In such case, should we take it for granted and deal entirely with some alternative reality, let's call it like this, or should we try to pick any examples, maybe very rare and unique examples of sort of management planning, which could be like occasional even? I don't know, and this is my question to everyone, if you have any sort of concept to answer.
I have some ideas, but maybe later speak.
Yes, maybe I could. Yes, thank you very much for the various presentations. I've got pages and pages of notes, fantastic information, fantastic expertise, which hopefully we can use quite soon. And this is what Tomasz mentioned, that in fact there is timing for all this, and I'll just come back to that. But first of all, the point that Sławomir made about where there are no management plans, and there are several countries we heard today where there are few management plans, or it is very difficult to create management plans. So basically, if there are no management plans, we should attempt to create management plans. Okay, it's easy to say that, very difficult to do. So if we choose priority sites, we can then focus on having some kind of planning, assistance for management of those areas for the few priority areas that we choose. And in those priority areas, let's not try and do a comprehensive management plan, but let's think about the opportunities that in that particular country are presented. And we heard from Morten that abandoned areas, abandoned lands, abandoned farming is an opportunity, and that the landowners are actually very keen for us to do work in these abandoned lands because it's their land and they like it and they like the waders. And we found a similar situation in Iceland, where two of my colleagues are doing some work on wader monitoring, and they've been to individual farmers, and the farmers are very keen to have their waders on their land. So no management plans, introduce management plans, pick priority areas, pick specific activities and look at the opportunities. And one further point on management planning where there are no, maybe we should think about management plans where we can combine benefits for climate, benefits for nature, waders, and benefits for the people themselves. And if we can come up with that very unique sort of solution, it might be easier to then persuade the regional governments and the national governments that looking after the areas is in fact very, very useful. Now, the point about timing, Tomasz very comprehensively discussed and showed us why we should be doing this, because it's very important for us to do this. But there is timing in this, and September, when we very much hope that our Spanish colleagues, together with us, will be able to put together a 1 or 2 day meeting. It will be very, very fundamentally important for that meeting to have as much information, have as much expertise available prior to that meeting and at that meeting itself. Now, one of the very simple reasons for that is, again, as Tomasz mentioned, there is a restoration program now, launched on the 24th, and the restoration program will be rolled out to member states by biogeographical regions. And that's what we're working on now. We're working on the Arctic biogeographical region, the Boreal biogeographical region, the continental biogeographical region, the Atlantic biogeographical region, and now in Spain, we'll be looking at the Mediterranean and the Micronesian. So what the Commission have seen us doing here is we're covering the whole of their range from the north to the south and all of their biogeographical regions. The restoration program will be rolled out by biogeographical regions. Natura 2000 was created by habitats by biogeographical regions. But what we have shown in the past 2 case studies in Dublin and in Gdańsk is that Natura 2000 does not always take into account concentrations of species. That is a gap. And therefore, when we're looking at waders, when we look at migratory species, breeding, passage, and wintering, we have to look at those areas where they're dispersed and where they're concentrated. And that's a gap. And that's a gap that the Commission has noticed. And they believe that together as a family of experts, the BirdLife family can offer them help, can offer them solutions, which they can then offer to the member states. So it's a very big ask. And I'll be honest, I am worried that we may be offering too much or promising too much, but we must do as much as possible to try and put together the available data, available expertise, and offer some very practical solutions to the Commission in a roadmap. We don't know what the roadmap will look like, but we have between now and September and in September to think about what our data, our expertise can result in the roadmap. Okay, I've gone on a bit there, but a fantastic meeting today. Just one step forward, and let's continue to work together and bring our expertise and knowledge together to get some very good results for birds and for people. Thank you.
Can I comment? Yes. I would like to comment this issue on lacking the management plans. In that case, I mean, this path suggested by SBIG to search for opportunities to create those management plans is obviously good, but anyway, I would search for some other documents which are suggesting some conservation measures for a site if we lack management plans, and there should be some. There should be some document like some report. Even if we completely lack a site with management plans, we can search for some hints on conservation measures, for example, in the ornithological literature, because very often, even if you have some faunistic publication, it ends in the discussion, it ends with some brief information on what conservation measures should be implemented at a site to keep the desired species there. So yes, so that's the first point. And the second point is that obviously this is a problem regarding our project and our work with guidelines. I mean, not having those management plans, but in terms of our message, it might be good. Because, you know, it would be really a strong message if we would be able to show that for most of the key sites across 4 countries, we lack proper management plannings. That is obviously horrible, but thanks to it, the message would be really strong. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else wants to add? Sorry, Tomek, you are moderating, not myself.
Any more questions or issues regarding guidelines or some other aspects of the project?
Oh, please.
Yeah, I said maybe Iceland should. No, actually, I meant to say something, but I don't really want to say anything because, like I said earlier, I didn't know much about the project before I said yes, and it's been very enlightening and wonderful to get to hear all these talks today. It's very daunting to kind of imagine how Iceland will do this, since we have no management plans. And if we're going to identify key sites in Iceland, we're going to identify the whole of Iceland, lowland areas. So, but I'm not trying to be a drag. I think I need to have like chats with people to try to understand like what would be necessary for us to do within this frame of the project. So, which would be lovely, and I'm happy to have that chat. I don't know whether this is the platform or this should be more generalized conversation, discussion.
Yes, obviously we will be in touch, and we already had a meeting with our Norwegian colleagues, just dedicated to the further work with guidelines, and now it's your turn, I should say. So we will be in touch just to have a kind of online meeting, probably in the near future.
Okay, that sounds good.
If I could just add to that the comment from Iceland, from our colleagues in Iceland, because yes, Iceland, all lowland areas in Iceland are very important for very large populations of the waders and migratory species. So in that case, yes, we have management plans for key sites if we know where these sites are and what they look like. But for the larger landscape measures, and particularly in Iceland, where there is maybe a threat from afforestation, from new forests being planted, landscape measures should be taken. So in other words, land use policy approaches should be taken. And together with Fugavær, we are working on that in terms of a project to identify non-invasive species, so that the government in Iceland does recognize what species are native, what species are non-native. That's the first step. But next year in 2023, we'll be planning to push that a bit further and to enter into dialogue with the government, with regional authorities, and with the forestry authorities, which may be very difficult, but I think we have to work towards a compromise on a large scale, land use planning scale. And that possibly takes into account also building regulations, as you mentioned, cottages,
Yeah.
which are very prominent in Iceland. So the result of this project and the other projects that OTOP have been leading with our colleagues in Norway and Iceland, and Belarus, of course, will be very beneficial. We'll look at management plans per site. And in fact, Thomas mentioned 3 threats that he identified in Poland, which I think can be a basis for further elaboration. And this was to do with land use changes, degradation. A solution could be restoration. A solution could be the restoration program of the EU. Then there were predators. You mentioned fox, you mentioned mink. So how do we control predators? So let's look at best practice and see if we can apply that. And then I think the third one you mentioned was agriculture changes from small scale farming to large scale farming. And again, Iceland, you mentioned as well, that that's the case in Iceland, where now the changing climate means that crops are being planted. So introducing agri-environment measures, helping to develop agri-environment measures as compensation to farmers. So there are some simple, fairly simple solutions to be applied from the results of looking at the management plans or the lack of management plans. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments?
If possible. I just wanted to remind and underline that there is a parallel project, as I put it, within this framework, and I mean the project dedicated to rewetting, and I think we should pay special attention to these kind of measures, since restoration of the hydrological regime at lowland wet grasslands could be very, very useful in protection and conservation of waders, since this is their primary habitat. And we should, I think, somehow maintain this tie in between 2 projects, which are taken in the pair by accident only at the first glance, because they are indeed interconnected. Okay.
Any other issues?
Okay, if I could just come in again, I have to leave in a few minutes. So on a positive point, I'd like to just mention that RSPB had an internal meeting 2 days, what are we, Monday? Last Friday. And for the East Atlantic Flyway, we reconfirmed that it is a priority for RSPB. So we will be working, hopefully, if you allow us to, we'll be working with BirdLife Partners across the Flyway. But in addition to that, it was decided that we RSPB would focus on large-scale project development in the Arctic biogeographical region, which means Iceland, which means Norway, and areas to the north. So that will be a new element in the Flyway. And so the results from this meeting on management planning in Iceland and in Norway, on looking at breeding migratory birds in those areas, will be extremely valuable for us then together to put forward large-scale funding plans. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm afraid I have to leave now.
Thank you. Krzysiek?
Well, as you presented the whole introduction to this panel, maybe I missed a part, but I think we should also consider the part where we prepare the management plans for the single places or single protected areas. And then we should recognize if the measures proposed are applicable in those places. Because we try to propose something good for nature overall, good for a specific habitat or specific species, or even a specific part of the land. But in some places, in some cases, there is maybe no possibility to introduce some of those general propositions, but we can change them and also find something unique for the place. Maybe it would be an example in Iceland, when there is dense plant forest in some places. And if it's a governmental idea, it may be difficult to stop this or change the idea, change the mind of the government to stop doing this. Then maybe there should be some sustainable consideration for the situation, which connect their plans and the need of nature. I don't know, but I think we need to focus on the specific places too, and the specific needs of the places to prepare both management plans for the overall region and for the specific places.
Thank you. Yes, so specific management plans will be analyzed to prepare the guidelines. So I think you are saying that we should add another element, so like looking if the conservation measures proposed in the management plans are applicable at all at a given site.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
This is important, and it would be nice, but it might be hard to judge by the expert, especially if the one that does not know the site that much. And that would be the case very often, I think. But yes, that's also important issue.
Yeah, it is very difficult, and it is in most cases it is a very big problem to firstly to find the measures that are applicable and to apply the measures which are proposed in general. Even in Poland, in the Świnica River Valley, there is a lot of ideas to introduce agricultural schemes on the meadows, but there are also large cattle farms which need hive for cattle. And if they introduce measures, they spend the money to buy the food for the cattle. So there is not a very good for them, and they don't want to do it. And this is a problem in this place.
Okay, thanks, Krzysiek. I think partly this issue might be solved by this analysis if the conservation measures was implemented at a site.
Yeah.
Because if not, the expert should think why, what was the reason, and he can come up with some conclusions on that.
Yeah, and in those conclusions, maybe what could be changed to apply the measures, and what could be changed in the idea to apply them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any more comments? Yes, so that was a long day. Sława, I think we can come to the end, basically.
Yes, and in accordance to the schedule, I have somehow summarized the meeting, and but the meeting was so intense. I would say I also have plenty of notes, and I would need some time in order to reconsider it and make a sort of summary out of it. but I will only underline and repeat maybe some basic statements of our meeting, if you allow me to do so. And I think I'll be able to finish up in 5 minutes. And first idea, which was I think maybe it was obvious, but nevertheless extremely important, that we as experts from four very different countries, which embrace the total like range and range in terms of natural conditions and political conditions as well, because there are also EU countries, Poland, and 3 non-EU countries with very different backgrounds and problems and you know, the management system, governance system, so on and so forth. But it's extremely important that we are working together, and we will be able to retrieve a big picture, to paint a big picture in this respect. This is one thing I just wanted to underline, and we have, I think, to somehow protect and keep and maintain this cooperation, which emerged on the auspices of this project, and will be also strengthened through the common work upon the guidelines. This is first thing. The second thing is what Tomek said, that this is the highest time for us to intervene with respect to waders, which unfortunately show this unfavorable dynamics, but at the same time they are a flagship species and the umbrella species, and they somehow indicate that the general conditions are worsening for the particular type of habitat, and it's the highest time for us now, and but also for the conservationist community in general, for local authorities, for governmental authorities to intervene in this respect. And third thing I would like to briefly stop on is that we have to produce the documents, the document and the output, which should be on the one hand very generic in terms of the wide range of countries and various conditions, but at the same time very specific in terms of particular activities, which should be like prescribed or proposed at least by us. And maybe what Zbig added, I find it extremely important that there is a sort of way out in using every sort of opportunities, despite the very favorable situation in terms of management planning, which unfortunately remains just a concept, just a vision in many countries and many cases, and it doesn't work properly. However, we could be like smart and look for opportunities, even if they are like opportunistic, like in terms of Icelandic case and the idea of reforestation of the country, which is a threat, obviously, but at the same time, this is a good point for us to raise this issue. So basically, that's it from my side. If someone wants to add anything, I think we have 2 more minutes, and if not, we will be closing our event, if you don't mind. Many thanks for your participation, for your attendance, for your questions. Maybe some of the questions could come into your mind in the post-production phase. So please do not leave them entirely for yourself. Please share your ideas, your problems, your questions, your solutions, maybe. So many thanks again, and let's keep in close touch.
Thank you.
Thank you from Norway. Thanks for all the nice talks. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Our pleasure.